to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Sivan Hong. Sivan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me, Jen.
I am thrilled you are here, and I would love for you to start with, how did you get into writing?
Oh, that is the big question. Because growing up, I never thought, even imagined that I would become an author. It was probably the last thing on my list of things that I would ever be, because I struggled profoundly with reading. And so reading and writing go hand in hand, and I felt much more comfortable in the universe of numbers and math, and this universe was completely foreign to me. But when I became a mother, and I have two incredible young boys, and they were both diagnosed with different forms of neurodiversity. One of them was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, and the other one was diagnosed with ADHD. And I saw that there was a gap in the market for picture books that were structured like social stories. And a social story is a tool that is used in special education to help a child work through a particular thing that may seem scary. And there weren't books out there that did that, and I needed books like that. So I started to create them, and I created books that had children wearing headphones, because I wanted my kids to be able to see that wearing headphones in the classroom is totally cool and fine. And it was that driver that was the impetus for me to say, this is something I'm going to do. It was never, oh, I wish I could be a writer, because I still feel like a neophyte, and I'm like, what am I doing, right? But I have to say, at this point in my career, it's the most fulfilling work that I have done to date. So I'm glad I found the path.
I'm so glad you did too. And I love that the inspiration, it really started from a place of love. It started from a place of recognizing that there was a way that you could do something else, something more, to not just help and serve your children, but more children who might feel the same. And that is so cool. So how, when you talk about a social story, could you go into a little bit more about that? For instance,
Yeah,
how did you
absolutely.
know that you were crafting the right story, or know that, did you get feedback from teachers on that? So talk more about
Yes,
that.
yes. So um, one of the moments where I realized that I needed to create a social story for my kid was for Halloween. And my oldest son was in kindergarten, and the Halloween parade was that day. And I had dressed him up. I can't even remember what I dressed him up as. I was so excited. This was going to be so great. What a fun day for the kids. And he wouldn't get out of the car. And nothing I said to this kid would get him out of the car. He was terrified. He did not want to go to school. He did not want to go to the Halloween parade. And as a mother, I felt like a complete failure. This is supposed to be the most, one of these magical days of the school year. And my kid is not getting that and doesn't want to go. What have I done wrong? Um, and and so he didn't go, right? Like, we waited till the Halloween parade was done, and then I brought him to school when it was going to be a normal rest of the day. And I talked to his teacher, and I talked to his special ed teacher and the team of educators who worked with him. And over the year, we tried to figure out what was the driver, what was the impetus for his behavior, and what could we do in order for the following year to make that event something that he could experience joy with. And so we were able to identify kind of 5 main things that made Halloween so scary. He had sensory issues, so the noise was really loud, or he was worried he wouldn't be able to recognize his friends in their costumes. And with the Halloween parade, all the parents come, and he was scared he wasn't going to be able to find me, and he would feel like he didn't have a parent there. And so we figured out these 5 things that would make Halloween really hard. And then we worked together to say, well, here are all the things that you can do to remedy those 5 things. And we came up with a list of 5 solutions to his fears. And we documented that. And that is the structure of a social story. It's, here's everything that's worrisome that could go wrong. And then here are all the solutions that you, the child, can be empowered to do to fix those bad things so that you have the confidence yourself that you fixed your problem and you can then move on. And we did all of those things. And the following year, he loved Halloween. He was all excited. They even sent me pictures of him dancing around in the parade, and it worked. And so that's the structure of a social story. And I said, my kid cannot be the only kind of child, the neurodivergent child, who feels nervous about Halloween. And frankly, there are kids who are not neurodivergent, who are neurotypical, that might find some of these things equally as nerve-wracking. And so that was my first book. And I said, here are all the things that a child is going to worry about. And I list them. And then here's the solution. And I list them. And the structure of the list is what makes it super accessible for these children, because they can then say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a structure, and here's my solution, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they are true stories. All of my books are based on the true stories and the true feelings and then solutions that came about to be able to fix these challenges.
Oh my gosh, my heart is just swelling listening to you. I just think that that is absolutely awesome that you found a way to help him so that the very next year you saw a completely different experience and he felt joy. I mean, that really makes me happy to hear that it shows the power of books. It shows the power of creating what you can create, especially when it's coming from love. There are no bounds when you create it from love like that. And that's what you've done. So when you had this book written, you have the storyline, you have the words, but I know you're the illustrator too. What was that like, illustrating that? Like, did you think in the terms of the pictures first and then write, or write the words because you needed to get a story going first to get your arms around it, and then use the illustration to amplify?
So the first thing I did was I drew my main character. And I like stuck that on the computer, and I was like, this is my guy. And it was an illustration of my son. And so in his Halloween costume, and I'm saying, this is my kid, right? This is who I'm writing about. And then I went through and I wrote the story, and then I pulled him in and I said, were these the things you were feeling? Like, I wanted to make sure that as I articulated it, it was authentic, that it wasn't my perception of what he was feeling, but really his perception of what he was feeling. And then the solutions to all of those things. And I sat with him and I asked him about what we should name the main character, because it was him. And he came up with the name, and then we deliberately used the names of his teachers in the story. So, and I kept that with all of my books, that the teachers who are in the books are real teachers, as kind of my way of saying thank you for all of the things that they do. And then after I laid it out, then I went in and I started to do the illustrations. And the illustrations in my books are very purposefully simple. They are part of the way that I make these books accessible to all different kinds of learners. Children with ADHD, for example, sometimes will get distracted by beautiful illustrations, right? Like, we see these books and we're like, wow, these illustrations are magical. And they will look over and they'll say, I wonder why there's a red bird sitting on that tree. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the story whatsoever, but it is a complete distraction. And so to make these books the kind of books where neurodivergent kids could really attach themselves to, I made the illustrations really, really simple. Really, like, this is just the illustration that goes with this story and nothing else. And then I went in and I said, it can't just be a story that's accessible to a parent reading it, because it kind of, there's a lot of age groups that could benefit from these books. So I made sure that the font that I used was dyslexic friendly, because again, we have all kinds of learners, and I really wanted to make sure that the books themselves were accessible to all these learners. And then once I published the first book, I then also had it created as an audiobook, because again, people consume books in lots of different ways. I personally only read audiobooks, and so I could only get, I was like, I had to be true to myself, that it had to be an audiobook as well. So that's my process.
I love that. Oh, wow. Okay. So I love that you have an audiobook. And to your point, you're right. There are different ways of learning. Even with adults, you can teach some instruction one way, but you might need what I would call driving directions one way, where it almost feels like it's listing it. Some might prefer a video, or like that YouTube video, or a PowerPoint that's more animated to kind of guide you through something. And someone might necessarily need to just hear those pieces. They're all forms of learning. They're all forms of digesting and synthesizing that information, but everyone might need a little something different to get to the end result. And I love that you were open to do that, and you found ways to do that while honoring the integrity of what you were creating. So when you were creating this, so you're mindful of wanting it to be a social story, you've built out what's necessary text-wise, you've done the illustrations this way. It sounds like your son became part of like his own beta reader. He was reading and checking and giving you feedback in it and being a part of it, which is super cool, I think. Did you have other, I'm going to use the term beta reader, did you have other beta readers who were a part of this process with you to offer other perspectives? Like, did other teachers come into play to read, or other parents or other children?
Yes, absolutely. Because otherwise it would just be our experience. And I wanted these books to be, as I keep saying, accessible and useful to as many kids and families as possible. And so I did have the teachers read them, because they were part of that experience. And I had other parents read them. And then I put it out there into the world, and I wasn't sure what the response was going to be. And as I said earlier, right, like I am a neophyte in this whole process, and I released a book about Halloween in February, which just shows you how little I really understood about anything to do with the publishing world. But it worked, because it's not, while Halloween is the theme, the book itself is about overcoming fear and being able to tackle challenges as a child on your own, and accepting your differences. And that those themes are very universal and not specific to the particular holiday that I talked about. And the response I got was overwhelming. And I said, okay, yeah, there's clearly a need for books like this. I was right. And so then I started to think about the series and started to put out some of the other books in the series.
Speaking of series, that was such a beautiful segue. So,
Not planned at all.
No, it's not. It's just as I'm listening to you, and I love that you said that, because I do know that you do have a series. So, as you realized, to your point, you have this, not just that you see the need, but there's also something in your heart pulling. You can feel it just in this conversation that, okay, now what more can I do? How else can I do this? So would you talk about how you transitioned from one book to several books, and how you thought through those different books?
So again, these books are based on things that I had already designed for my own kids, right? The tools, the outlines are all there. And I just had to go into my computer and say, which of these stories that I've already created is a story that I can share that others can get benefits from. And I had to turn around and look at my own family and realize that I have two boys. And if I write one book about one kid and not about the other kid, we were going to have some serious problems. And so the order of the stories is very much based on the fact that the next one had to be about the younger kid, because he would get mad. And so he, like the first one, decided the name of the character of the book, and at the time, and probably still, his favorite author is Dave Pilkey, and so George is his favorite character from Captain Underpants, and so the book was titled George. So Dave Pilkey, if you're out there, you've inspired my son greatly. But we did the same process where I sat down with him and he's, I drew him and he knows it's him, and he has a little red rest buddy he slept with his whole life, and that little stuffed animal is in the book, and there are pictures that if you know our family, like that looks like our family, and it was very personal, but the social story structure stayed true, and the educational value of the story is consistent. And that one was about Mondays, because, and you will see there are themes to this series about how hard change can be. And Mondays, if you ask any educator, is a really hard day of the week. Shy of the day after Halloween is, it's this day where the kids come back and you have the highest level of absences because it's a change from the weekend. And young children have all these fears and worries about what's going to happen in school on Monday. Are their friends still going to be their friends? Are they, is the schedule going to stay the same? What if their teacher is out? And they have all these fears that manifest over the weekend. And that this is a story that says, we can make Mondays a fun day. And it's not just a kid thing, right? We always hear adults complain about the kind of the shock to their system of going back to work on a Monday. So it applies to them. And then I stepped back and I said, there is a sense in the media, or there seems to be this constant theme that neurodivergent people are white male boys. And my boys are interracial, and it's hard to tell that from the illustrations because they're cartoons. But I wanted to make sure that I didn't just have boys as the main characters of my stories. And so the next two books in the series are girls of color, because they are the least represented for neurodivergent people in the media, right? We keep thinking about Rain Man or Sheldon as this is what everybody is, and no. And I wanted those girls to be able to see themselves in the books too. And so even though the stories were stories that happened to my kids and are real, I just changed the character. So again, to keep with that theme of making them as accessible as possible.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that so much, because that shows the growth of what can happen when you start one book and that love grows. And to your point, okay, so a Halloween book was released in February. You know what? Cool, because
Right.
you didn't know what you didn't know, but in the same breath, obviously it was important to do. And Monday, maybe the book was released on a Monday, maybe it was
It
released.
was not.
See, it might not have been, because
Nope.
but in the same breath, that's okay too, that it didn't necessarily do that. And it's still cool. Like I love the learning that I'm hearing in this too, because it is something that you feel very agile in when you're running this type of a business. When you're writing, there is an agility that you're working through too, because you might need to see characters change or a point of view change in order to bring that story to life in a greater way than what you might have initially thought. But that's what I'm hearing, and what you're describing too, is the agility and the willingness to make changes so that you can keep growing with that.
Right. As an author, you feel so connected to the story, but at the end of the day, it is not about your connection to the story. It is about the reader's connection to the story, right? And so it couldn't be a bunch of stories about my kids. Like, nobody wants to read that. It had to be the stories that spoke to the readers, that said, this story is making a difference to me, and how do I keep developing my characters so that I could speak to the widest range of kids and readers, right? Like, that's what it's about. We have to release the personal connection that we have with those books when we publish them, and say, it's no longer mine, right? It can't be mine. It has to be yours as the reader.
I love the way you said that you're releasing that connection. And the way I've heard it before is like the writer, the author has started the idea, but the reader finishes it and the reader continues it really with a conversation with someone else, or by sharing this book with someone else saying, hey, you got to read this. Or, when that little one who has read this book and feels like this is really cool. And when their teacher says, hey, we're going to do show and tell, bring something that's important to you. And they bring this book because this book has touched their heart. That's just such a beautiful thing. You can feel that again, I keep going back to love, but that is what it feels like when you have created something like that. And especially for children, that I just think that that's beautiful. So since you've been growing this series, there's not just themes in the context of, to your point, reaching the neurodiverse, having the accessibility. So you're using these two principles and the themes, but the biggest theme of them all is working through change. And change, I mean, it's a neutral thing. It's how we're looking at it, but it can still feel scary, even when it is a positive, even when it's a good thing that happens, because it's different than what was. So how do you help when you're talking about these books as an entity versus talking about them perhaps like as this latest book, or I'm honing in on one, switching gears to kind of on the author marketing business side of things, how do you talk about them in the series idea?
So for me, to your point, I mean, you nailed it exactly. It is about how children can overcome change and how they can have the tools that empower them to do it on their own, right? And this notion of leveraging something that is tried and true in education, like a social story, and handing it to the child and letting them then work through those things, to me, those are the themes of all the books. And I've actually had parents say to me that now when my kid wants to talk about their feelings, they come up with their list of top 5 reasons why they feel this way, because they're modeling what they are learning in the books. And to me, that's like, yes, that's exactly what we want, because we don't want it to be the parent saying, I know school's starting and you're really nervous. You want the child to say, here are all the things that I'm feeling, and here's how I'm going to work through them together, but to work through them. And so that theme of change continues.
Oh my gosh, I love that you've gotten feedback like that. I love that. So what I'm wondering then is one of those things that perhaps comes up in each book, something that helps the child to recognize them asking for help or them speaking up for themselves, in the sense of saying, I need to tell my mom or tell my dad or ask my teacher, something that says, or ask my older sibling something, like being willing to speak up. Is that almost one of those 5 that consistently shows up? There might be other things that are different given the different situation, because Halloween, I'm thinking about a mask. Monday, I'm not wearing a mask. It still might be scary that I can't find my friend, but it might look a little different. But the speaking up might be something that comes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Every single book has a list of the child telling their parents or a grown-up, here are the 5 things that, I'm worried about with this particular challenge. And, one of my books is about the end of the school year. And that was one that it was influenced by teachers, because I never think about the end of the school year as being something that's going to be challenging, because, everyone's so excited about summer, but it's change. And kids worry about change. And so that list of saying, here are the top 5 things that I'm scared about for the end of school, is not just something that the child shares with their parents, but also with the teachers in this case, right? Because it's the adult who's in that situation. But it creates that spark of conversation. It allows the kid to be able to structure their ideas in their head in a way that then they can articulate it to others.
Okay, so on the flip side, then what about the beginning of school?
Yes, we have one of those books too, actually, because that's the obvious one. And where I live in Connecticut, school starts at the end of August, or started at the end of August. And the week before school, I think, is the hardest week in my house. Even now, because there's so much unknown, right? Like, is my teacher gonna like me? Do my friends remember me from the summer? Am I gonna have to make all new friends? Like, the list goes on and on and on. And the tools that the child can use to be able to get through that are real tools that I suggest. And I've had parents say thank you for those ideas. You know, one of the ones that I love is that bring your kid in before school starts. The chance to meet their teacher and walk around their classroom without other kids there takes such pressure out of a situation that normally is crazy, right? You see all these new faces, you're trying to find your seat, there's a teacher. Like, just a quiet one-on-one with the teacher allows that kid to then, once all the kids are in the room, focus on all the kids and not worry about anything else. It makes that transition really, really smooth. And I haven't heard of any school district that isn't willing to let the kid come in the day before school and do that to make that transition easier. So my books are filled with solutions like that allow parents to come up and say, oh, we can do this to make it much easier. Now my oldest son says he doesn't need that anymore. He's cool coming in with everybody else. But my youngest son still says, you know, I want to come in before everybody because it's easier for me. Great.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really cool about what you just said too is that they both felt confident to be able to say, this is what I figured out what I need, and I'm willing to tell you. And I feel pretty good with it. And they also recognize that if something changes, maybe they tried something and it's like, no, I think I need something else. It sounds like they're also willing to speak up. And that's just such a beautiful thing.
Right, because you want them to own that, right? Like, I don't want to be the mom who has a kid in college who's calling the professor and is like, why isn't my kid sitting in a better seat, right? Like, you hear these horror stories. And I used to, you know, teach at the graduate school level. And I remember some of those situations. Thank God I never had a parent call me, but I've heard of that happening. And I'm like, no, we need to teach our children to take ownership for themselves about what they want. And that's a huge skill.
It is, but it also sounds like these books are a beautiful way of helping children to be able to do that. Thank you. I love what you have created. I love that. I can't wait to see what else comes from you because this is just so awesome. Sivan, thank you.
Jen.
This is just
Thank
amazing. You. Where can people connect with you? Where can they get your books?
So I have the only Sivan Hong name in the world, which makes it very easy because my website is sivanhong.com, and you can get my books there, as well as I have teacher and school psychologist created teacher and parent guides for all my books that are free that you can get on the website. And then my books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and a bunch of independent bookshops. So yeah.
Awesome. This has been fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.